Right. It's a bit of a difficult video for me because I'm not really sure how I'm going to have to start this video. The reason mainly that I'm going to struggle is because for the last year or so on, I really didn't really have much to say. I have been battling a lot with anxiety, insomnia, OCD, and all sorts of other problems, mentally speaking, depression, somewhat of depression. I would say anhedonia, sorry. I've struggled with anhedonia in general, just, depressive tendencies, and also just generally losing everything I've known. If anybody knew what I was talking about in 2024, you might have known that I struggled with this severe insomnia, what I would deem treatment-resistant insomnia, and that's really just shackling me on every type of way, shape, or forms. I have seen myself degrading literally by the minute, second, and hour, and I've seen myself literally degrading by month, if not by year. I've seen 2024 was a really hectic year, even up till now. So to now brings us about 1 year in and a couple months from where I really, really struggled with insomnia. I started struggling with insomnia and start from the inception of 2024 that I started being unable to sleep. I essentially stopped sleeping. I couldn't go to bed and slept. And as you can imagine, I mean, it left a massive toll on me. It was so bad that I would lose sleep for like even days. I didn't crash in the beginning of 2024. I didn't crash. I didn't recall how I crashed essentially and started sleeping. I just started deteriorating to the point where it started getting better. Like my sleep did get better, but it wasn't as if I crashed and suddenly I slept. Um, it was a battle. It was a massive battle for me in general. 2024 was a massive battle, and the worst of it all was the fact that I was left completely just bruised, scarred. Essentially, I didn't really know what to do after that point. It was a spiritual warfare as well as a physical warfare that I physically I couldn't shield it anymore any longer. I just physically just was so dilapidated and completely just retrenched of emotion, so to speak, that I couldn't keep on going and I was completely just out of it. Now, it was a very, very tough year. I'm starting to kind of bring up the pieces that I struggled with so much in 2024. It is very difficult for me to kind of fragmentally look into everything and deconstruct the life that I used to have. I notice like cognitive deficits that I start to notice right now, like, even basing accountancy sometimes that starts to get the best of me. Also, what I was relatively fond of was research. I used to write quite a lot. I used to put a lot of words on a paper. My typing speed was close to 75 to about 80 words per minute, which was quite of high, on a high spectrum. I taught myself typing when I was rather 13 years old, 14 years old. I think back to it, and I was a rather fast typer. Now I sometimes get stuck at like 55 or 50 words per minute, and I still have to do some edits. So it's a very big paradigm shift in my life. I'm not really sure where it's gonna go. So, yeah, this has brought a lot of changes in my life. And if I think about, dissecting everything, it's like it was extremely difficult and urgent when I looked in 2024. Um, I'm never going to be free of mental health problems. I'm never going to be free of OCD, and I would have to struggle with it for my whole life. I would have to sit with this. Um, I've become quite spiritual throughout the years. As you have remembered me back in 2024, I talked about Christianity, I talked about spirituality. Christianity never really meant my transformation to get rid of insomnia or anything, so I decided to kind of give it up slightly. And I know a lot of you might be kind of disconcerting about the fact that I kind of gave up Christianity in lieu of my promise of practicing Christianity a bit more. But I gave up Christianity because it didn't really allow me to really grow. I kept thinking about Christianity as such, and my family's Christian. I completely respect it. I have no I have no avowment for the religion or anything. I don't discern or dismiss religions because I feel it's not completely correlated with my worldviews. But the main problem that I find with Christianity, embedded with Christianity, is the fact that the fear component of it is very, very huge, very big, and it's something that I struggle with, and I couldn't physically find love within the religion. I would say I still fear the tyrannical abyss of actually throwing to hell. I don't think it will really ever go away, but it does leave me quite tormented. I found a lot of peace within Buddhism, especially. Whereas Christianity is quite concerned with sacrifices. We even see sacrificial rites of animals, for instance, in Buddhism is very different, and it's something that really drawn me akin to the Buddhist worldview a lot because I found that more morally and spiritually I can grow more. There's a lot more practices in Buddhism that allows for somebody to kind of um, saturate themselves within love and almost recurse the bad stuff in their lives and completely renounce it. So I do think to disown that was something that was quite sacrificial, which I really enjoyed about Buddhism in general. Now, as for my own personal life, I have found that I'm starting to kind of think that I do have a short or a short maybe a overlap with autism. I do think like looking at the years of looking at my videos and potentially going into the abyss, I had to kind of resort to the fact that I might have Asperger's syndrome, and also the fact that it literally just dawned on me a couple of months ago when somebody kind of mentioned that I might have Asperger's based on my writings. I am an avid writer. I might actually review quite my blog, my Substack, that somebody actually asked me to do a Substack. So I've started writing on Substack. I'm quite a compulsive writer, hence my OCD, of course. But yes, so I started having a Substack account and I started kind of posting things like, yeah, quite a propos or off the cuff kind of sometimes subsequently part one, part two. I do have a bit of a indexing or pagination to it, so it's not as if I don't have. I do post somewhat regularly on Substack. I would review my blog down. I wanted to get back into the topic of the satanic panic and everything, and especially with occult views. I'm going to go into a bit more videos regarding the occult. I've researched a lot of the occult stuff, during the time because I've had this spiritual awakening, so I had to go into a lot of beliefs. I realized quite that there's a lot to draw up from the spiritual worldviews in terms of help. Like sometimes we are just afraid, and we look into the spiritual worldview as, we're afraid of it. So we look at it like tyrannically into the spiritual worldview. But it's quite a lot of times, if you look at the spiritual side, um, part of what kind of got me to the occult side of things was the fact that I've always feared the dark. When I was a kid, I was quite afraid of the dark. I was quite afraid of the devil, of demons, everything like that. And it's generally this the dark, the turgid dark side, the char-like side of the Abrahamic side of religion. So I've always kind of feared the satanical side of the world, or the demonical side of the world, and it's gotten me to the point where I had to look face up to the dark side, and I had to physically face the dark side. And it's gotten me to the point where throughout my life I was afraid of Satan. I was afraid of the demons. I was afraid of the devil. It's gotten me to the point where I had to really find out a bit more about it. I had to find out what is it that I'm running away from. Um, it was throughout my philosophy of Jungian psychology that I started getting into the idea of shadow self, and it's really gotten me to it was a cosmic trail to me to the bigger questions, essentially, of the occult. What does it mean? Is it really evil? That type of thing. And I started researching more about it, and what I found was that I did go into a lot of areas, like I literally pushed the boundary, so to speak, of spiritual exegesis, or essentially spiritual transformation, to the point where I started realizing they were dangerous. But if I really would want to conquer my life, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do a lot of spiritual work and a lot of spiritual research to really find my own path. Because what I found with Christianity, it just didn't mash up. It left me completely bruised and scarred, as I said before, and it didn't really mash up to my own worldviews. I realized that throughout this deep spiritual world, there's this kind of adventure, misadventure, like intertwining. I found a different path for myself. It was very individualistically based. One thing is I became much more spiritual. I became completely vexed to this idea of spirituality in general, and I started venerating spirituality, in its median sense. I started looking into more spiritual faiths, and even faiths that society or even Christianity demonized as bad or evil. I've realized, for instance, Wicca or witchcraft, as many people deem it, aren't the same. Like Wiccan religion uses witchcraft, but witchcraft isn't really this evil thing. I've realized, for instance, it's interesting to think about it. I come from a European, English slash, my ancestry kind of, they're English slash German slash French. So I come from a British, my ancestry is essentially British and French and German, or Germanic, essentially, if you were going to say Anglo-Saxon slash Germanic. That's how I would trace back my ancestry. And from that, I found that being closer to my faith, being closer to the faiths of my homeland, of the northern, the highlands essentially, really just it enlightened me in a way. It enlightened my soul to the point where um, it was like an embroidery where I started noticing that there was so much more to life than just the haberdashery of Christian faith and the Abrahamic faith. That there was something deeper than us, for us as pagans essentially, that we rested our faith upon. And I've noticed that that was something like kind of a lost jewel in the diamond in the rough, if you will, that I've discovered through actually abandoning a lot of what Christianity taught me. I've also noticed that some of the other religions were kind of peaceful. I mean, if you look at Buddhism, for instance, there are no sacrifices whatsoever. In lieu of the fact that, if you actually look at Christianity, you do see certain facets of sacrificial rites or tendencies. For instance, even animal sacrifices were done in Christianity in the name of Jesus or God, or not in the name of Jesus necessarily, but you do see that in Abrahamic, the old faith, the Jehovah, who asked, you know, Abram and Isaac, if I could remember correct. Isaac was obviously the ritual, but that wasn't going to happen. But to me, the stench toward human sacrifice in the Old Testament, especially talking about Abram, was kind of, it was disconcerting and disgruntling in my behalf when I saw that. Also animal sacrifices and the reference to pagans and killing the pagans. It's even pagan children. I mean, it's to me it's shocking when I actually read the Old Testament and when I realized there's a reason that a lot of what starts in Christianity is actually not that good and it's not benevolent. It's actually it's maleficent, if at all. And through that lens, I've started realizing that there are there's a cataclysmical denotion in Christianity that I had to kind of denounce. And for that reason, I started going to other faiths and I started really looking to other faiths like Buddhism and, you know, Norse paganism essentially. And I started looking at galvanizing a different worldview and transmugating something from the old or the ancient past, or alchemizing, as the alchemists say that I use a lot of alchemical narratives and symbolisms because it's so strong, and it's something I've denounced in my old life, and it's something I'm so passionate about. And it's perhaps part of autism that or Asperger's that I started to become so passionate about spirituality, and I've always been. You see, I've always been a very spiritual person. Now, I was kind of excited, so I had to make this video because I really wanted to voice both my concerns but also my interest in spirituality, so many of you guys who are interested in these types of topics can start discussing it with me. And I have said, the kind of the vow, the promise that I've made to myself was that if I get better, I would want to live a more spiritual life, and it's one of the commandments of my vow that I wanted to, that I essentially wanted to grip upon and reveal and definitely not conceal, but elevate and unlift. And to definitely I wanted to tie it up because I thought tying this up is so crucially important to getting back to the meat of everything, and that was mainly the fact that I've always been a very spiritual person. I remember ever since youth, I've been venerating and just extremely ecstatic about spirituality, the Bible, and everything. And I think this ecstaticism can be something that can mount into other forms of spirituality. And I saw it happening. I saw it mounting into, say, my interest in Buddhism, Norse paganism, as well as certain, offshoots of that. And it's quite interesting when you look at spirituality to have like a bird's eye view of it. You realize that there's so much more to it. Like there's so many other worldviews you can essentially take in spirituality that is just it's like an opium den of potential. If I to quote the phrase or paraphrase it incorrectly, opium den is usually a bad thing, but I have to use the phrase opium den because like it's like an opium den. It's like you have an opium sniff and you feel like have this massive dopamine hit and it just goes high. And to me is the invoice of spirituality is in essence is this feeling that there's just so much to learn in your spiritual prognosis and your exegesis, essentially spiritually speaking. Now, I'm a bit excited. I have this problem where narratively I struggle, and you might have noticed in my videos that I've lost a lot of subscribers. Narratively, I struggle a lot. Paragraph cohesion isn't easy for me. Even if I write, I can, intertwine or solicit quite a lot of sentences, right? I can write a lot of sentences, and I can make them, I can conjecture them so densely in a way, but that's more theoretics. I can look at sentences, I can deconstruct them and reconstruct them to look kind of cannibalize them, if you will. But I can fish out certain fragments within sentence structure, like modifiers, participles, etc., 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 and I can make the sentence a lot longer, kind of extended or elevated to the point where it's still cogent or factual, but it's difficult to undress the it the other the skeleton, to undress the specific the meaning of the sentence. So the precision of it is almost difficult because it's embedded and it's so dense. And that's one thing I've noticed was in my own writing. When I kind of looked at it, I noticed that I was able to write quite complex sentences and contexture complex constructions or constructibles within my sentences, adding different forms of belated, forms or extensions to the sentences, and prefixes and suffixes to the point where it is still cogent logically, but the sentence becomes so completely erudite and dense that I physically cannot defactor it into a proper full communication. And that's part of my, I think that's going into the left brain domain. The fact that I've always been a very creative person, but I start to grow more left brain now, where I really lose that mojo, that just, in a way, that avatar, if you will, to actually write sentences and writing to the point where people actually want to read it. Like way back, I remember I could write stories. It just sounded so rhythmically and so articulately that people wanted to read my stories. I got really, really good stories, and now it's like everything becomes so extremely factual sometimes, or it just loses its drift completely. And even my videos, like, I started noticing it. But I hope that you guys will still stick around, if not just for the passion of it, but I really hope that you would take something away from these videos. And I do think there's quite a lot that you can potentially take away from. But in anyway, on a bit of a different slant or lateral shift to another topic, is the idea of spirituality and the path that you're going to be living. It's quite crucial that if you are on the spiritual path, you are doubting, and you just have this itch that you can't scratch. That's kind of what I've experienced. Like I had this itch that I physically couldn't scratch otherwise. I had to delve into the occult. I had to delve into things like even channeling that I was extremely fearful of before. I couldn't help but looking into it. What is it really? What are we really doing? Is it really just speaking to spirits, or just physically finding out or demorphizing specific aspects of yourself? And I realized, for instance, channeling was, there is no real such thing as channeling, of course, but it's a way for you to find yourself. It's just a very creative process. And I found that there are specific studies like NCBI where there would be confidants, almost like conclusions, or evidence. So what I really enjoyed about looking at NCBI was that specific of these practices, like spiritual practices, most of them, a lot of them, have been studied through literature, through specific control groups. I'm not going to say it's a very large control group, but if you actually look at the control groups, let's say 12 to 15 people, you get these small control groups that were studies, and these people would practice specific, things like channeling or mediumship or things like meditation or mindfulness, and they would practice it with a specific, span of, say, a week or 2 weeks, and there would be a specific proxy evaluation to ensure that everybody had the same statutory, practice that they were doing. And through that, they looked at it in the conclusiveness and saw what was actually the betterment or the worsening of how actually the practice was actually helping the people. So they looked at the conclusive model, or an empirically validated model, to show brain states that were before and after, and how they diverged, or how it differed from the before and after. So there was specific imaging to how the meditators looked before and how they were looked after in terms of the brain imaging, which was quite interesting to see that within 2 weeks, for instance, the channelers exhibited a specific, I will actually link the study below. With the channelers actually exhibited a specific neural density that were unexhibited by their mindfulness meditators. Things like this, there's a cross-pollinative effect with meditation and channeling, that if you think you're speaking to something or someone, and you go into deep meditation, they seem to form a specific cluster of density in your mind. And if you're just meditating and just go into deep, it's interesting that that cluster would be vacant in the meditators. So there's almost like a duality that happens, like a mutual exclusivity that starts to happening, or a binary effect where either the one thing or the other thing start happening. I'm just going to quickly rearrange this. So there was studies done that showed, looking into channeling, looking into mindfulness meditation as a spiritual practice, so people can use them not for channeling, but for, you know, probably getting better as psychological, or overcoming their psychological abuse or treatment, or their psychological states of this despair. Now, what's interesting to me is if you actually look at channeling, or you look at mindfulness meditation, you look at shamanistic ritual, you will see that there is a benefit in the brain long term when you're actually looking at these things that would come with compassion and with another party. So for lonely people, they could actually look at practicing channeling or practicing things like shamanism to defabricize their solitary, frustrations. A lot of us, I especially, am, living by myself. I do live with family, but I can feel quite alone. And I think if you're struggling with things like depression or anxiety and so on, you can take spiritual practices. There are a lot of them with specific scientific benefits, and you can start practicing these practices, not because you believe these practices have a specific affinity to binding yourself with a spiritual deity, but because these practices have a conclusive empirical over overlap of positive accruement. And I think just because of this, you can physically use these practices to benefit psychologically or psychoanalytically, rather than having a specific spiritual high basis around this, or thinking that it's a or have a distortion spiritually, or a dogmatic view on it. So I think there's quite a lot to say about practicing spiritual practices that were otherwise unordained by church or by the clergy of the Abrahamic religions, and looking at it simply from a point of science. And it's very difficult, though, if you actually look at spirituality not from a point of science. For instance, I don't believe, I don't. I'm more of an atheist or an agnostic. Like, I would say I'm an agnostic atheist. I do believe that I'm probably more of a pantheist. I wouldn't really say I'm, an atheist in the classical sense. Not that atheism means that you're not spiritual, but I mean, I would say I don't agree with a lot of what the atheists, the tenets of atheism, as a fundamental pillar tenet. I don't think, for instance, that there are no. I don't disbelieve. I don't believe in the classical mythological or mythological naturalism that atheism promotes. I don't necessarily attune to the fact that natural myth mythology has the binding spell of the natural world. I don't necessarily think that you can look at mythology as the only way to eject or reject it in in form of, or say, for the fact that you might believe in something else. So I don't really believe that mythological naturalism is the way forward. Not least because I don't think it explains things like um, ESP or extrasensory perception. I don't think it explains things like noetic perception or specific noetic feelings of, you know, let's say you could confirm something happening by feeling. Well, it could be true or not that the feeling could have actually, the a priori feeling to feeling something's going to happen could actually mean that it could just be the case that it was a feeling. Sure, I mean that is, noetic disconfirmation, but there's also a chance that that feeling could have been as a direct result of some other entity maybe communicating with you and bestowing upon you specific knowledge. It could just as well be you can't approve or disprove or confirm that. There's no way for you on any basis to really confirm or disconfirm or disprove or disconjunct the fact that somebody might have communicated with you as such, before or in prior. So I think just based on that, there are specific things that we can tussle with. We don't necessarily need to know 100% if that's true or not. And I think within that bounds or constrictions, there's a lot of room for that, right? I generally don't believe that there are spirits. I don't necessarily I believe spirit is very, very ill-defined. I don't think that spirit captures its correct meaning. Like, I would say you can potentially say there's spirit within anything. Like, what's a spirit? There's spirit within the world, in your soul. But I don't really think it's a literal fictition. I don't think it is something that is a phantasm of an uber body or a hyper body state of being, or a or organic or inorganic state of being. I don't think spirit is inorganic. I think it's definitionally it's a lexical problem, not rather than a specific problem where a lateralization of of the ghostly, phantomistically, um, encapsulation many people trying to make it out to be. So I personally don't believe that spirits or spirit is can happen. I don't believe spirits can talk to you. I don't really believe you will become a spirit. Much, um, in in definition or embedded in the definition that you kind of use the word spirit. I do believe, however, that there is spirit in the way that you see it as interpretation or archetype. I don't really think that that could necessarily be defaulted. So in view of that, I would say the word spirit probably is very vexed and ambiguous, or very, ontologically oxymoronical. So I don't really think you can really use the word spirit to for anything other than what people understand it to be. But you can use it in an archetypal way. You can use it in a way that is a bit more hyperbolical, in the way just to get attention. Like in my case, I don't think if I go into mindfulness meditation that I necessarily talk to a spirit. That's not how I interpret it. I won't even know how not to do it. Like if you talk to a spirit, if you go into channeling, well, why don't you talk to spirits when you don't go into channeling? Like I don't think channeling is necessarily shown to be a mechanism for contacting the spirit world any more than just sitting here and talking to you. Contact, you know what I mean? And you can talk about it intentional you want, but I don't think there is any. I think you only go into buyer's remorse of some side. Once you start chatting, you kind of feel bad about doing that. But I don't think there is a real mechanism to doing that other than a cultural taboo. Essentially, just a cultural taboo. People say you cannot do it or you may not do it because it's a cultural taboo, and that's because of religious. But if you look at it spiritually, then there is no doorway or there's no lock in the door essentially, because I mean you're not a Christian, but if you're not a Christian, it doesn't make sense. So I think in if you do actually research into the spiritual world becomes less malignant. It becomes much less malignant to somebody who's essentially interested in spirituality. So I think within the world of spirituality, I mean, the spiritual world would become less malignant to somebody who is interested in spirituality, and less or more malignant to somebody who is not interested in it. And I think somebody who's open to it is going to view the spirit world or the spiritual world as more benign and less malignant. And I think this is, to me, how I view the world, is I've started to view the world as less malignant. I don't view the spiritual world or the heterodoxy of spirituality essentially as a maleficent or a malice or a malicing or a menacing force. I don't think it's anything other than a prototypical. I think the spirit world is archetypal to us. You can see how you see the world is the perspective which the world will come back to you and see you through its own lens in a way, or reflective index. If you look at first intention, for instance, the reflective intention, you might see the world as such through the eyes to which you see it through. And if you look at the world in a sense of diatribical way, or a typhoonic way, you will start to see that as an end effect or a direct result of your viewpoint. And conversely, I mean, if you do see the world in a good light, if you do try and put a lot of intention into seeing the world better, into making the world a better place, into pushing positive attention and energy throughout the world, irrespective of or despite who you might think you are or who you might be or associate with, you would get that the effect of that is going to be can only be good and can only be benevolent rather than malevolent. And so I want to get back to the topic of spirituality and how some of us seem to be a bit more spiritual than other people. I got into spirituality, especially Buddhism, more so other faiths and neo-paganism, because of the person I am. I don't think maybe I was just born this way. Maybe I was just born as a spiritual person, but I got into spirituality or spiritualism. I've researched a lot of spiritualities. Namely theosophy, as well as things like even small bits of thelema. I don't know too much about it, but I've researched what it was about, and there were some paths I've realized not to kind of traverse. I've noticed, some of these paths were at least ordained by people who were completely left-handed in their approach. They were just there for sacrificing the ego and essentially were very, very ego-dystonic in a way, and they weren't really open to to compassion or conscientiousness within a compassionate model or a discourse of rationality. They were more so doing that to pushing a specific agenda or marker of personal gratuity or egotistical drive. And I think through that, it's very, very easy. I'm just going to have to plug in my laptop. Sorry for that. Anyway, I'm kind of getting in a bit of a tirade and a diatribe here because I'm quite excited right now to talk to you guys. Now, okay, I've just plugged in my laptop. So, I'm not going to get into topics too much spirituality because I don't think it's going to really serve it's not really going to serve the populace of people who really listen to me on YouTube. So I don't think I'm going to I do anybody really a favor of going or divulging deep into spirituality. I wanted to just scratch the surface with it and say, if you are interested, if you're a very spiritual person like I am, you're going to at some point you're going to at some point neglect your personal upbringing or personal faith, especially if the faith has shackled you to a way or ostracized a specific part of you. And in my case, Christianity did that. Christianity, with its abomination of hell and specific sects or specific religions, did that to me. I would never really, even if I'm a Christian, even if I were to convert back to Christianity, I would never lose my fear of hell. It's something that I wanted to overcome and something that I wanted to ostensibly look into overcoming because I felt there was something that completely shackled me and broke me to the whim. And so it struck to the bone through you know via and throughout my childhood and throughout my college years, my adolescence. I've noticed this fear of, if I die, I'm probably going to go to hell, and it's a fear that is still somewhat with me, and I'm starting to outgrow it day by day. But it wasn't good for me. I didn't notice that there's to me the salt pepper narrative with Christianity, that in one way you get the salt, you get the good stuff, and then comes the pepper and you start coughing. You know, Christianity was quite a lot like that to me, where I've noticed quite a lot of good things in Christ, in the Christ way, but Christ never denounced God. Christ never denounced the fact that God in the Old Testament did a lot of bad stuff that we morally eclipse as a specific form of bad stuff. I mean, if you look at ritual sacrifice, I talk about animals, you talk about pagans or kids who did nothing wrong but should be dying just because they're pagans and just because they've kids. We talk about things like reference to slashing babies on their heads on a rock, or spilling their blood. That's things you wouldn't associate with Satanism in a way. Like, if you think about killing people in a ritual sacrifice, you think about Satanism. You don't think about things like Christianity. That's not what people think when they think Christian. They think about good natured person, but yeah, that's Christianity. But I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, which Christianity rests on, you do see things like appallingness in terms of values, morals. The morals of the Ten Commandments is one thing that's been given to Moses. But you do look at an ostracization of those morals, or a complete, veneration of other morals, and a complete disjunction from the morals that we've been taught. And that's the problem that I currently have with the general faith of the Abrahamic religions, is that you have this absolute nightmarish, nefarious, killing sprees and stuff that's going on as a result. We see it in Israel, Palestine. We do see it. Sorry, not in Israel. We see it in Iraq, Iran, but we see it with the wars. Within that is the Muslim faith, which is kind of even more tyrannical and even more induced to slaughtery of every kind. We see animal slaughter. We see human slaughtery as a result. I mean, this isn't the type of stuff that you have associated a good faith with. And I'm so sorry to say, but if you're Christian, Godspeed to you. I'm not trying to hack your faith at any form, way, or shape or form, or anything like that. But I do think I want to kind of reverence it as a potential negative and a DEFCON in terms of what it gives the world. Because I mean, if you look at a faith from that lens, you can't diametrically oppose your own faith by looking at another faith and saying, we cannot live coexisting or coexist together. You can't really do that, because then you aren't really moral. I mean, if you're saying, like, Buddhists don't do that. If a Buddhist lives next to a Christian, that's fine. Within the Buddhist view, Christianity is completely welcome. I mean, the reverse isn't necessarily as true. Within, let's say, I'm not talking about the Christian view, but some Christians still believe in murdering or slaughtering pagans. I mean, there are such Christians, and there's very good reason if the Old Testament talks about murdering pagans. Why should a Christian essentially denounce that just because he's not able to bottle it up and actually do it? So I see it with a lot of Christians. They can actually vow against it. It's not as if they can completely slice or dice that idea, but they're still, in a way, they're still a bit scared or a bit iffy or a bit startled of actually doing that. So it's not that they are against Christianity, opposing pagans, and even the Old Testament killing pagans. They would usually just say, well, it was a different time. But the problem with that is there are some Christians who won't believe that. And the fact is, God did say that in the Old Testament, and I mean, you can't unspeak that. Whereas in Buddhism, that's a completely just, it's a no-no. You cannot do sack, you cannot spill blood, you may not do that because it's bad karma, but it's also because it's not good morale. And within the Buddhist context, that's just wrong. And to me, the Buddhist context is more moral than the Christian context, because in Buddhism, you may not kill an animal, for instance, you just may not spill blood. That to me is moral. I mean, a life form is holy, it's sacred. We do believe, I mean, the evolution is changed. Like Buddhism to me is very atheistic, but it's, to me, if you look at just general morals and ethics or human ethics, Buddhism is kind of close to that. Because in Buddhism, the idea of the salience of, or the sentience at least of life as such is universal. For instance, if you have animal life or human life, it's universal, it's life, it's still life. So you may not kill. So that's something that to me makes sense within the embroidery of an ethical framework, because if we all are animals, then at some point, we have been animals. I mean, back in the evolutionary stages, we do have cousins, and the animal kingdom is a distant cousin of us in a way. Now, it's difficult to go with plants because I don't think plant has. I do think there is some sentience within plants, but there's no evidence of pain. When you say eat a plant, or when you try and vulturize a plant, vulturize, I'm not going to mean violently vulturizing a plant. There's no sense that there is an impulse of pain. But we do see it with animals. We do see it with other sentient lives. We do it some. I mean, in Buddhism, yes, you may also not actually kill a fly, or you may. I know this could be a bit far-fetched. I'm a guilty person in that sense. I do kill a lot of flies, but I don't think if there were another solution. Okay, obviously flies don't show any impulse of pain or any specific markers of scene of pain in that sense. And if you squat it very quickly, but there are. What I'm trying to get to here is that I'm not really trying to derail off topic, because I can do it quite a lot of times. But the essence of Buddhism is you don't want to cause unneeded suffering. And that includes animals, that includes humans. At some point, there are shades of grey. I understand it. But I mean, I think generally speaking, it's very difficult to look at a religion and really take it up seriously if there is a problem with pain or morality endued with it. And I think in the case of Christianity, the problem that I have with Christianity is that there is a clear distinction and a problem with pain when it comes to animal sacrifice or animal killing, like a lot of Christians would eat meat. We also don't see any reference to meat being bestowed by the Christian God or anything like that. So we do see that problem when it comes to the problem of pain and suffering, that there is no modern reference when we can look at Christianity to not kill an animal, slaughter it, even though we know that killing and slaughtering animals can cause pain, and we don't see the same practices, let's say, for killing or slaughtering animals that are humane, in the sense that it's always humane or omni-benevolent or omni-humane or omni-rational, poly-rational to humanity. For instance, some people believe humanity is slicing an animal's neck to kill it and to essentially get the meat. Now, to me, the problem with that is obviously that that is certainly not. That's actually shown in some cases to be extremely painful, but also extremely immoral. And we don't see Christianity make any attempt in speaking about animals, killing or what one should eat, for instance. Or it doesn't make a out. It doesn't make a. It doesn't put a precedent on, for instance, vegetarianism versus veganism versus carnivorism. It doesn't make a stance to abstain from killing sentience. And that's my problem essentially with Christianity, is that if we are to be moral, we cannot allow for sentient killing. Because if we were to take the proposition that we are somewhat also sentient and the animals are sentient, then there has to be some sort of rule governing sentience. And I don't see it with Christianity. I don't see that Christianity makes an ample or a morsel of argument to showcase that sentient killing, especially when it comes to the killing or slicing or dicing, what we're doing today, is immoral. It also doesn't make any provision for how one can kill, or how one can, for instance, put into a specific or stop to a specific life. Like the idea of peaceful euthanasia is something that we do because of humaneness, not because Christianity told us to do it. It's because there's anything that God has pointed us to in order to, mercify animals in any way, shape, or form. It's because we do it. It's because we do it out of human ethics, right? Now, in Buddhism, it's another story. Buddhism does show that we may not kill. So through that, it's construed that there's an umbrella that if you do kill, you may not kill. So that's the solution itself. You're not gonna put harm to an animal, any type of sentient life. Hinduism also has it to a major extent. Now, I wanted to kind of go back to the topic of spirituality. If you are a spiritual seeker, it's a very long and dusty road. Your family may condone you and you may feel very guilty. I've noticed that, especially in the beginning of my spiritual searches, I felt incredibly guilty. Sometimes if I research something like Buddhism or even things like you Wiccan, and so I would just feel extremely guilty. I would have to do the sinner's prayer all over again. And sometimes I would feel bad, but that was my journey. And the way that I see it is I was not disillusioned, or at least I wasn't betraying my own trust in my own self-worth through doing that. I had to learn through pain that there are other spiritualities and that I had a better path. And it was my preconditioning that I had to overcome. So understand preconditioning can run very strong. And if you delve into spirituality too quickly, you will notice a bit of a knee-jerk reaction or backlash. And I've noticed it with my own self as well. So it's something you have to do piece by piece. Don't go too deep into it. Do it piece by piece. Take time to nourish your search. If you're a loner, you're a lonely guy, a lonely man, or lonely woman, it's going to be tougher because spirituality is it is a shining marble. It's that thing you gotta kind of grab. It's a shining pearl, and it's something that could really treasure and rectify your life in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it can also be a vice rather than a virtue. And I would say it would be a vice because at some point, spirituality can be a bit omniscient to the point where it can become a bit egotistonic or ego-driven and a bit transpersonal through various means. And I think many of the people that were spiritualists or spiritual seekers have noticed it as well. People can delve into a bit more coarsely and a bit more quickly, and sometimes that could be it could be a curse embedded within a blessing, so to speak. And I mean, it's not going to be good for your soul, your psyche, and you would notice wear and tear in every way that you can look at yourself. So it's something that I want to really stress when you're looking at spiritual searching. That you have to do it gradually, you have to do it small bit by bit, piece by piece, because if you're gonna go into that hate first, you're gonna notice a lot of backlash, and it's gonna happen either within your family or your own life. So when you're doing spiritual work, spiritual seeking, start slowly. Maybe start with meditation, start with journaling, and you'll get to the right path. If you're not comfortable right now with things like channeling, mediumship, I'm not saying you should go into mediumship or anything like that, but channeling, or the idea of opening yourself to the divine. It's a shift of perspective. Exactly, it's a shift of perspective. It's the only thing I've just talked about. Channeling is a word. Talking to the divine, or speaking to the divine, or opening up to the divine, or even through journaling or automatic writing, can be a form of doing that. It can be a form of the release, and there's a form of catharsis within it. But what I really want to try and get to, especially with spiritual talks, is that spirituality, I think, is, and I wholeheartedly and vehemently believe this, but I mean, spirituality is a very personal thing. I don't think anyone, even in your family, has a right to disavow your spirituality in the form that you find. Everybody's spirituality is different, right? But I don't think it would be right for anybody to disteach or dis distangle your own view, or dismount your view in lieu of what they want you to believe. And I think this is being doing, we do see it everywhere happening, of course. I mean, it's not right that this is happening, but I want to say it would pay if you do it slowly. Like, you would have to take it step by step, and you would have to do it slowly, because if you're going to do it too quickly, it could really backfire. And you're going to notice that it could actually harm you. It could spiritually harm you. You can actually get into spiritual a spiritual char, spiritual boom, essentially sonic boom. Things would just start going wrong as a result of it if you do it too quickly. And I know that some people could be very interested in spirituality and they want to delve deep in, especially if they come from a Christian background. They think they're going to leave Christianity or drop Christianity and all of a sudden just go into spirituality. It's not how it works. It's better just to take things slowly and to be modest and frugal with your attempt at actually looking into spirituality, rather than just going into it head first. You will definitely burn your skin when you're doing it quite quickly. You have to develop a sense of stoicism when it comes to spiritual stoicism. You have to become get it or comfortable in the leisure room of spirituality rather than just jumping right about or right afloat into it. Um, and you have to stay abreast because it can take a lot of time for you to really find your feet. Now, in general, this is just my rambling of spirituality. Now, there's the occult that I've talked about before, the occult. In the occult, there are a lot of, it's really an umbrella term to mean that's the secret teachings that people have regarded as secret, that we now have unenlightened in a way to get to the forefront of light. So it used to be these teachings or these concepts that people would essentially think of as the banned teachings or the banned movements of thinking, which is now unraveled or de-occulted. De-occulted is a word I use quite a lot now. De-occulted to show that these are really not banned or mystery sects. They are credulent to the world right now that we're using. So within the occult, there are various movements, various sects, various. A lot of the occult is unfortunately demonized for being satanical or being left wing or being extremely transpersonal in a way where it's almost vexed to almost any worldview. It's very Nietzschean, very Promethean, if very Seedian, if you really will. There are specific sects like in within the occult that are very self-centered, that are very egocentric and completely just Machiavellian, if you will, or Harlequin, if you will. There are such sects, but there are also within the occult movements that allow you to empower a better worldview and enjoy yourself and also have a sense of equanimity in your own worldview and your own spite of in spite of exactly what you believed in. So the occult isn't one thing, it is a embroidery of movements. It's a smorgasbord of potential options that you can actually pick from, and within that you can learn. Now, I'm not an occult advocate. I'm not saying that anybody should be going, but I'm saying if you are a spiritual seeker, it will probably find you that at some point you're going to have to delve a bit deep into it and potentially find out if it's for you or not. You're going to have to find out if there's a movement within it that might be for you. And I think it's something that every spiritual seeker and every person who is serious about themselves would have to delve into at some point, because you have to mix and match. You have to find. And by the way, I wanted to say something else on another note. There isn't something like an absolute or a construed version of something. You have to find essentially the mosaic of your beliefs, and through that you're going to have to look at different faiths. Some of the faiths are more what people claim left-hand path, right? This is your typically ego-driven, ego-centric, Machiavellian, selfish, narcissistic type of faiths. Many people do look into. They want to look into this faith. I won't I physically won't devour or specifically motivate you going into anything specifically, but your heart says what you should be going into. For me, some of these faiths are truly, truly horrifying. In this sense, I'm not saying horrifying because they're horrifying, but if you actually look at their values, it's horrifying. And you do look at the Crowleyan things like Satanism is also something that to me seems a bit horrifying in the sense that quite a lot of what it teaches seems to be about just ego. And I'm not saying like there truly is a lot of whitewashing when it comes to satanical what it means to be a real Satanist or a Thelemite or a demon worship. Also, there's a lot what Christians usually, like I said, Christians essentially Machiavellianize the movements within the cult as bad or demonizing when it's not. And you would even think that a lot of the movements, like movements that are announced to be more towards the side of Satan, would be bad and where offerings would be done, but that's not necessarily the case. For instance, you know, I mean, I watched this recent interview with Zena Schreck from with Jordan Peterson, of course. She was talking about her own upbringing. She basically is the daughter of the satanic of Anton LaVey, essentially, who was the head of Satanism of the Satanic Church, and she talked about a bit about the beliefs and stuff about what Satanists essentially believe in, and they don't do animal sacrifice for any type of sacrifice. For all that I've actually gotten, they don't do anything of that. So that's a myth from Christians, obviously. There are actually just humanists who believe in they're just atheists. That's essentially what, and it's just cosplay. It's pretty much just cosplay. But I'm saying that the problem with Satanism essentially is the fact that there's an ego component of it. However you want to see it, there's an ego component within it, and it can corrupt people because of that. And that's essentially the problem within the occult movements. Is within these movements, people find that they have a sense of power, and they can control people, and then they go deeper into it and they become corrupted. And that's something that you have to look into as a spiritual seeker, that you have to be really careful of not getting corrupted, because a lot of the spiritualities, especially like I said, the left hand path spiritualities, I'm not talking about Tantra. The Tantra left hand path is a bit different, but a lot of the problem I have with the Western esotericists is that a lot of them demonized or utilized the Eastern rhetorics or the hermeneutics from the East and essentially galvanized or culminized it into their own forms. And what they did with these forms is they bolstered these forms in their own view. So you do see it, for instance, with Aleister Crowley's movements. For instance, I'm going to talk about Aleister Crowley a bit later on as well in the next video, but you can see it with these movements. Is he took things, and Theosophy does it too. They essentially bootstrapped the Eastern religions into their own worldview, where they started looking at things like Buddhism, and they hashed it with their own way of looking at things. Like they had these crazy, this Maccabean ways of looking at the world, and then of course there's offshoots of it, but the main issue that I have with these theosophy or these movies like the Thelemites is that they essentially look at these movements of the Eastern movements and they start using it for selfish purposes. They essentially became these movements are solely narcissistic. You don't find that there's a broadery of love or a specific amalgamation within the movement of love or compassion. What you just see is this selfish, blue layered, almost middle class fluttering of ego, this ego and centrism, and essentially just becoming this absolute narcissism. That's the problem with this Machiavellianism, if you will, this um almost this yeah, this Machiavellian. That's the problem that you keep seeing with these faiths. And I'm not saying they're everything but religions. I'm not saying they're religions or anything, but there are spiritual faiths that are hurting and can cluster your ego and your compassion and your belief. It isn't it isn't something that can be, in my way, rectified with a good worldview. And I think it's something that you have to be looking and trying, like research everything for yourself and find out where your heart leads to, but be true to yourself. Keep what you find and be true to yourself. That's all I can tell you. Don't um don't pollute your own, don't corrupt yourself too soon. Look into things, take it slowly, and you will find a path that will work for you. And I think, to go into a bit of another topic, it was a hell of a ride for me over the last time. I mean, 2024 was a hell of a ride, and it's left me in a very, very bad position, in almost like a Jacob's pit, if you will. And it took a ladder to be able to get out of it, and nobody really gave it to me. I had to find out my own way of actually getting out of the pit. So it's one thing that it did put me into a mountain of meditation. I had to be, Muhammad in the mountain to find an answer that could, unkey this problem or open the door, so to freedom, to walk my road to freedom. So it was truly a very, very large thorny bed of nails to walk. It was a long road for me, and it was definitely one of the long and narrow road that people think, the proverbial long and narrow road that I had to also walk. So I'm not finished with my path. I mean, I don't think I'm finished with insomnia. I'm still struggling, and my spiritual life is definitely, it's augmenting this to the insomniac path. It's making it a bit better. I've noticed in a lot of spiritual traditions that there are a lot of answers, a lot of betterments. Even within the yogic traditions and the Christian tradition, there are specific accounts. There are research, scientific accounts of people who have used spirituality precisely and only spirituality or solely spirituality for their betterments. And it, to me, was remarkable to see, the demographic specifics and the conclusions of such people, and how they've been able to almost to defabricize their own condition to a point where they have found a solution. They found a panacea within their approach. And to me, that's just fascinating to kind of conclude that. So I wanted to leave it on that note and just say that the spiritual seeker is always going to find that he's going to buttress against a wall, and he has to buttress through to get to the other side, and it's not going to be easy always. And the only way is to really research, but be responsible with your research and ensure that you follow your heart and don't just go and jump headfirst into a specific condition. You know, put your foot in, put your toe into the water and feel how hot or how cold it is. Uh, Calibrate your temperature and find and probe the threshold, and then you can prod on in your life and you physically find your own path. But don't be narrow-minded, and don't, you know, do not be deceitful or prejudiced with your path at all. Look at it from an angle of interest and curiosity, and be conscientious enough to find more about it. Do your research and ask around. Reddit is a good form, but it's the spiritual path is a personal path, and it's not something that I can tell you to do. You have I have to say that, and I must add that anybody and everybody is completely free to comment below. I would always get back to you within due time. I mean, I can't make any promises. This week has been horrible. Sometimes the insomnia can get a bit rowdy at times and unruly at times. And for that, I would have to say that I'm probably going to need to say cease fire for a time until I can comment. But I would like to hear your opinions on the spiritual path, especially the spiritual seekers. I also might, in hindsight of this, I might actually make another video where we talk about my mental health journeys, where I would have to update a bit of you uh, about regarding my mental health journeys, because it's going to be, I've seen, especially the last year and 3 months, I've noticed that my mental health has gone, it's gone a bit better at this point, but there are dips, there are definitely dips in my mental health, and it's also very difficult at times for me to keep my head above water, so to speak. So it's probably just going to be way out for me to get back into grab the microphone and get back to YouTube, and also, you know, uncalumnize, the potential that I see in front of me, and slowly become the old person I used to be. And that's going to take it's going to need to remove a boulder in a massive road to improvement for me to be able to get there. But I'm slowly getting there, and I guess that was just a bit of rambling, so I'm probably going to stop the arrow. I didn't edit anything here, so I'm just going to probably just, you know, go ahead, essentially just piece it off before I upload it on YouTube. Thank you so much.